This is a Chris Reed small Sabenza, widely recognized as setting a standard for fit and finish, and generally offering very high performance with some concerns about less than ideal handle ergonomics and less than ideal heat treatment of the steel, but generally acknowledged as a nice knife for the price point. In a lot of discussions about folding knives, the topic of abuse comes up frequently. And there are people who will argue that using a knife to do anything besides very light cutting is abusive. So any cutting which loads the knife vertically, up or down, which can stress the lock, or laterally, side to side, which can stress the pivot in the handle construction and snap the blades, these things are abusive. And of course, harder cutting, which can chip, damage, or excessively wear the edge, can also be deemed abusive. Now, of course, the reason why this is a controversial topic is because makers and manufacturers don't clearly, openly, and frankly state what's acceptable within the scope of work for their knives, and often leave it up to users to fight about it on the forums. Now, it's obviously perfectly fine for a maker or a manufacturer to set any tolerance they want on their knives. However, as an extremely strong counterpoint to the general argument of saying stuff is abusive where someone stabs a knife into a tree and the lock breaks, or when they're cutting very thick materials and they press relatively hard and the blade cracks off, or when they're cutting cardboard and the edge chips out, any of these types of things. If you're calling those things abusive, if you take a light folding knife and you go out and as you're walking along a trail, you need to get a small stick to roast a marshmallow or a wiener for your kid or maybe yourself, and you take your folding knife and you just pop off a branch and you take a huge chunk out of the blade, or the lock collapses, or the slabs fly off, or if any of this funky stuff happens and someone decides to call it abuse, well, there's a very common and a very frank counter argument that I would put forward to that, and that is you're using the wrong knife then. What you need to be using is this. This is a folding knife from Havalon. They make a number of them. This is just one of them. It's called the Piranta Edge. This knife is designed to do one thing only, and it does that extremely well. It's low stress cutting. It's not for stabbing, it's not for slashing at hard materials, it's not for really heavy cutting where you have to twist the knife, it's not for prying. Again, it's only for doing one thing and one thing well, and that's low stress cutting. So it has a very, very thin surgical scalpel blade. These are replaceable. When you buy the knife, it comes with a little pouch that has a bunch of them, and they're all sealed in individual wrappers. These are the blades. So of course, as you wear the edge down, or if you do manage to break off the blade, you just pop another one on. Of course, if you don't break it and you want to, you can obviously sharpen it. There's no reason why you have to discard it. But again, this knife here obliterates many of the arguments for abuse, because again, if it is abusive to take a knife like this and cut a small twig by making a pass at it, if it's abusive to rock this into a hard material, if it's abusive to use this to try to split small pieces of wood, if it's abusive to use this to cut very hard materials like drywall or asphalt shingles or all those types of materials, if all these things are abusive and can physically and grossly damage this knife by causing the blade to crack in half, by causing the lock to snap, by causing the handle slabs to violently fly apart, to cause huge, great big pieces to come out of the edge, if that's what happens when you use a knife and you have to be so restricted that you can only use it for very low stress cutting, this is the wrong knife to have. This is what you need to be carrying. Now what I'm going to be doing over the next little while is actually figure out where you can't use this. How far do you have to go with this knife before the blade stand a significant chance of cracking off? And that's going to be interesting to me because I'm going to be carrying this and using this just for regular everyday utility. I'll be using it in the kitchen, I'll be using it outside, in around the house. I'll be using it for general woodworking, taking bark off trees, anything and everything that I need to cut, I'm going to be using this knife for. And again, checking to see what the durability limits are on these very thin blades. And then that will answer the question for me is, what do I need to be doing that requires a much heavier folder? Because of course you can see the much thicker spine. But again, the main point of this video is a counter argument to the common, oh that's abusive. Every time somebody does something that's relatively mild and their knife explodes, that's often a common counter argument. Again, if that's the argument you're going to make, you're using the wrong knife. You need to be using this if all you're doing is low stress cutting.